Marty Supreme, Made in America. It's the words inscribed above 3 stars on the orange ping pong balls of our protagonist, Marty Mauser. These ping pong balls and everything else about Marty Supreme have been the forefront of one of the most impressive marketing campaigns of recent movie history. 2025 was a year crowded with movies trying to diagnose modern American culture, and its last major release, Josh Safdie's Marty Supreme, might be the most American film of them all. Marty Mauser, played by Timothee Chalamet, is young, hungry, and aggressively confident, a table tennis prodigy convinced he's destined for greatness. Conveniently, that belief is also the movie's marketing hook. Loosely based on the life of Marty Reisman, whose skill at table tennis gained him a certain level of fame in the 1950s, our in-universe Marty is convinced he'll be the next great American athlete superstar. This is a scuffling 23-year-old lower middle-class kid from the Lower East Side of New York. A kid who comes from nothing, hustling and scheming his way towards his dreams of fame and fortune. That desire plugs directly into the most durable narrative American cinema has ever produced, the underdog. Audiences love stories about people who come from nowhere and refuse to stay there. That story shows up everywhere because it flatters a national self-image that values the idea that grit and hard work can bring anyone to the top. To understand how Marty Supreme works, you have to understand the tradition it's stepping into. This underdog story is a foundational part of a larger cinematic lineage often called the American epic. In the same way that there's a concept of the great American novel, the idea that a single work can capture the spirit of a nation at a time and place, there exists the same idea within cinema. Dating back to Gone with the Wind in 1939, every generation has found one of their own. These are big, sprawling stories about people who begin with nothing and attempt to carve their names into history. They usually unfold over long run times, move across decades, and treat personal ambition as something inseparable from the nation itself. The American Film Institute defines an epic this way: a genre of large-scale films set in a cinematic interpretation of the past. Their scope defies and demands, either in the mode in which they are presented or their range across time. Whether it's The Godfather in the 70s, Once Upon a Time in America in the 80s, or There Will Be Blood in the 2000s, some of the most enduring American films live in this register. The 2020s certainly have some entries into this genre, such as Martin Scorsese's Killers of a Flower Moon, last year's Oscar contender The Brutalist, and arguably Damien Chazelle's Babylon. But it does feel like there's a gap in the market for a film that speaks directly to the modern day. And that's where Marty Supreme comes in. What makes Marty Supreme interesting is how it situates itself behind these films without trying to match their scale. Marty's story doesn't stretch across generations, instead it compresses epic ambition into a single restless life. The desire is all the same, but instead of oil rigs and mob families, we have ping pong paddles and the Harlem Globetrotters. Marty Supreme is the modern American epic we've been waiting for, a film that understands ambition as something lived day to day, shaped by hustle culture and the pressure to keep going, even as adulthood starts to set in. And the way the film achieves those ideas is surprisingly simple. It borrows the framing of a sports movie. Much like the American epic, the best sports movies are able to craft narratives that audiences easily rally behind. These films work because they offer a simple, physicalized version of ambition. You either win or you lose, you move forward or you don't. On the surface, Marty Supreme looks ready to play that same game. It presents itself as a sports biopic. It centers competition. Despite all the twists and turns, it's ultimately building towards a championship game. It even chooses a sport that feels unconventional enough to spark curiosity. Table tennis might sound minor on paper, but one thing I appreciate is how the film treats it with absolute seriousness. The rallies are shot like battles and matches feel fast, physical, and punishing. As we delve deeper into Marty's obsession, the high-stakes games feel even more weighty. Some sports lend themselves to cinema more easily than others, and boxing has always been especially generous to filmmakers. There are countless films I could list here, but it certainly seems the case that whenever a prestigious director decides to make a sports film, they often find themselves rooted within the 4 corners of the boxing ring. The ring creates a natural stage, and the physicality of boxing translates the internal turmoil of characters into a tangible thing we can see. Over time, that clarity has produced a shared vocabulary for the sports genre, a small handful of films that audiences return to when they think about what a sports movie is supposed to feel like. At the center of that tradition sits Rocky. Rocky is the underdog story in its purest form. A working-class guy from Philadelphia gets a shot he doesn't deserve and refuses to waste it. The film speaks directly to an American belief in class mobility, the idea that dedication and effort can change any person's circumstances. Much like Marty, we're introduced to Rocky as he's scrapping by in a dead-end job. Marty works at his uncle's shoe store, Rocky collects debts for Tony Gazzo. Both of them are also striving towards the same sporting end goal. Rocky wants to defeat Apollo to prove his worth in the boxing world, while Marty wants to defeat Endo to become a world champion. Beating them means recognition, and it means crossing from obscurity into visibility. If there's any film that Marty Supreme shares a direct lineage with, it might be Rocky, not just because they're both sports films, but because they both utilize the underdog narrative to reflect the society in which they're made. Released in the mid-1970s, Rocky arrived during a period of American national exhaustion. The Vietnam War had ended only a year earlier, and it had deeply traumatized and divided the US population. At the same time that trust in institutions was eroding from foreign policy, the concept of mass layoffs began, and the extension of the civil rights movement from the late 60s continued on. Against that backdrop, Rocky offered reassurance. It suggested that perseverance still mattered, and that any old Joe from around the block could gain meaning no matter who was in front of them. Even if the world felt unstable, self-discipline provided a form of grounding. In this way, Rocky was very much a film that was made in its moment, for that moment. But unlike Rocky, Marty Supreme exists in two different decades. The film is set in the 1950s, but it's also a cultural product of our modern times. This dichotomy between when the film is set and the styling of it gives it the appeal of the American epic. Despite only taking place over 8 months, it feels like it's sprawling throughout time and decades. Marty's story isn't stylized as one of training or hard work like Rocky's. His motor is fueled by confidence, anxiety, and appetite, all of the things that Josh Safdie has mastered throughout his filmography so far. He might be the perfect director for this story, carrying the sports drama and underdog frameworks forward, then bending it to speak to modern audiences.
This is like a movie about sacrifice in pursuit of a dream, and it's something I can relate to deeply, and we live in a bleak time, especially for young people, so this film is an attempt at an antidote to that, and to continue to believe in yourself, to continue to dream big, and to follow your dreams and not take no for an answer.
If Rocky arrived at a moment that needed reassurance, Marty comes from a culture that doesn't really believe in reassurance anymore. The promise that hard work alone will sort everything out feels thin nowadays. Most people in their 20s understand this instinctively. You can do everything right, follow the steps, put in the hours, and still feel stuck. That doesn't make you lazy or cynical, it makes you realistic. Marty carries that realism in his bones. He isn't waiting for his hard work or natural talent to reward him. He assumes it won't, so he finds other ways to get what he desires. He schemes and hustles, he pushes himself into rooms where he doesn't quite belong, and acts like he's already earned the space. There's something incredibly familiar about that reflex, because it's how a lot of people learn to survive right now. It does increasingly feel like we have to constantly sell ourselves and hustle to fill a gap where stability used to live. In its focus on Marty's restlessness, the film shares a blueprint with director Josh Safdie's previous films, Good Time and Uncut Gems. Both films revolve around people who simply can't stop moving. Marty fits that pattern, but with one important twist. While Howard Ratner from Uncut Gems may gamble on outcomes and odds, Marty gambles on himself. In doing so, Marty Supreme feels honest about what it's like to be in your 20s right now, not in a sentimental way and not as a cautionary tale, but as a recognition of the world we live in. Marty learns quickly that talent only matters when someone with resources decides it does. His life becomes organized around money, around the people who control it, and around the small humiliations required to stay in their orbit. When he kneels before Milton Rockwell and begs for an opportunity he once dismissed, the moment lands with a mix of embarrassment and clarity. Progress in Marty's world comes through submission as much as it does skill. Marty exists in a moment where you can lose your job, retrain yourself, apply everywhere, and still stall out. Despite this film taking place in the 1950s, it recognizes the modern reality of the world where hard work isn't the only thing that matters. The kind of hustling that Marty embodies feels more resonant to a generation that knows they have to build a unique path to the top. But as much as Marty is a film created for the now, it also situates itself clearly within the 1950s. Setting the film in 1952 is crucial. Writer of the film Ronald Bronstein even says the film is partly about the America that emerges as victors after World War II. This is a time where the ramifications of the war are still being felt by everyone. We see this with the Japanese character of Endo, first with the mention of him being able to get around the travel ban, and then him becoming a symbol of pride for a rebuilding nation. The choice to make Marty's antagonist Japanese is so smart. It layers the film with a kind of post-war tension and meaning, but also provides an interesting contrast in values. You have a society predicated on humility, dignity, and honor, facing off against Marty's brashness and unstoppable desire to build a name for himself. And what's great is that Marty's desire doesn't come from nowhere. It too is linked to the war. Marty is constantly foregrounding his own Jewish identity. He declares himself Hitler's worst nightmare because he knows that'll get him written up in the paper, even if it's only on page 12. When he's asked about his past by reporters, he pretends to fall asleep. In the same way that the Japanese are trying to find a new identity for themselves after the war, so are Jewish people who have experienced mass trauma. What Marty Supreme captures is what that search for a new identity looks like one generation removed. He visits the pyramids, puts a piece in his pocket, and hands it to his mother with a quiet pride, telling her, "We made this." In fact, almost all of the older generation that Marty comes into contact with is in some way directly impacted by the war. Milton and Kay lost their son to it, and it's hard not to look at Kay's relationship with Marty as some sort of reflection of that loss. The film even makes a rare pivot from the time period it's set in, when in an earlier scene Marty asks his friend and fellow ping pong player Bela Kletschke to tell Milton a vivid story from his time in a concentration camp. And then we get a flashback to something that's shockingly based on a true story. I don't think it's a coincidence that Marty's friendship with Kletschke and him giving a part of the pyramids to his mom are two of the only moments where Marty shows genuine kindness to the people around him. Sure, Marty's life is surrounded and defined by this mass trauma, but he's also the first in a generation with a bit of breathing room to believe in himself. While Rocky grows out of a specifically Italian-American experience and tries to stretch that story into something universal, Marty Supreme is rooted in a post-war reckoning with Jewish identity. It's part of a lineage of stories about what survival turns into once survival is no longer the only goal. That gap between the life you inherit and the one you reach for finds a striking parallel in another recent film, The Brutalist. When The Brutalist was released last year, one of the dominating narratives around it was that it was the return of the American epic. Here again, we find a post-World War II, decade-sprawling story about an immigrant who comes from nothing and is trying to make his way in the world. The character at the center of that, Laszlo Toth, is not too dissimilar to Marty. Both men contain a single-minded pursuit of meaning in a world that's previously rejected people like them. And in each case, it leads them in a head-on conflict with an upper class who doesn't know what to do with these people in the wake of the war. Like The Brutalist, Marty interrogates the relationship between talent and capital, between raw ability and old money. Kevin O'Leary's character functions much like Guy Pearce's in The Brutalist, the gatekeeper, the benefactor, and the embodiment of power that both enables and humiliates the artist. Both films are examples of the American epic genre at its best. While Marty Supreme might have the marketing campaign which appeals to Gen Z's appetite and the signature style of the Safdies that turns any movie into an exciting, anxiety-induced watch, it is equally as interested in the traditional ideas of the American epic as any film before it. At the core of the film is a young man building himself from scratch. As he tells his uncle he's going to be the man of the house to take care of his mom. As he tells reporters he's going to be the one who breaks through and makes a name for himself and the sport of ping pong. What Marty Supreme ultimately understands is that the American epic doesn't have to exist within the walls of a history-scaling story to feel monumental. It can live inside the anxious momentum of your 20s, inside the urge to make something of yourself before time and responsibilities start shaping the edges of your life. Marty's ambition has been matched by Timothee Chalamet's marketing efforts, but it also mirrors the kind of restlessness we all feel under the constraints of our modern society. Yet the film is also rooted in a post-war world where identity is something that needs to be rebuilt. The film lets these two realities sit together without smoothing either out. In doing so, Marty Supreme feels like the epic we've been missing. The cruel irony is that Marty doesn't end up as the world champion. He spent the whole film traveling the world, hustling, trying to build a name for himself, and yet all he can claim is that he won an exhibition. The film very easily could have ended with him down on the floor celebrating this tiny victory, but instead we see Marty return back home to the birth of his child. Like many of us, Marty is so caught up on making it, on hustling and grinding that he misses what is right in front of him. Victory, ambition, and building an identity in the world is no longer just about his personal goals. It now means so much more that he has a human looking to him for steadiness. The camera lingers on a face, learning that this chapter of his life is over and that a new one is about to begin. As the lyrics to "Everybody Wants to Rule the World" slowly fade in, we watch Marty welcomed into his new life, and there's no turning back from it. Thanks for watching. I really enjoyed Marty Supreme in ways that I didn't expect to. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more in-depth ramblings about the films that I love. And let me know what you think about Marty Supreme in the comments.